Sophie Martinez pressed her palm against the cool glass window of the bus as Seattle's skyline came into view. The city stretched before her like a mountain range of steel and ambition, so different from the gentle coast of Cannon Beach where she had spent all 24 years of her life. Her fingers traced nervous patterns on her worn canvas bag as the bus pulled into the station. The medical center loomed 15 stories high on Madison Street, all gleaming windows and modern architecture. Sophie had put off this appointment for 6 months, but Dr. Rivers back home had been insistent. The irregular heartbeat she had been experiencing needed specialized testing, and the Blake Medical Institute was apparently the best on the West Coast. She checked in at the reception desk, where a woman with perfect makeup and a crisp white uniform smiled professionally at her. The waiting room felt like stepping into a different universe. Everything was pristine, from the leather chairs to the abstract art on the walls. Sophie smoothed down her floral sundress, suddenly aware of how out of place she looked among the other patients in their designer clothes. When her name was called, Sophie followed a nurse down a corridor that smelled faintly of lavender and antiseptic. The examination room was larger than her bedroom back home. With equipment she could not begin to identify, she changed into the hospital gown and sat on the examination table, her bare feet dangling as she waited. When the door opened, Sophie looked up and forgot how to breathe. Dr. Jonathan Blake entered with confident strides, his white coat open over a navy dress shirt. He was tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair that had just enough wave to suggest it might be unruly if he ever let it grow longer. His eyes were a striking gray-blue, the color of the ocean before a storm. There was something about his face that spoke of sleepless nights and heavy responsibilities. Fine lines around his eyes that suggested he was older than his smooth skin would indicate. He stopped when he saw her, just for a fraction of a second, and Sophie caught something flash across his features before the professional mask settled into place. "Miss Martinez," he said, and his voice was deeper than she expected, with a warmth that did not match the clinical setting. "I'm Dr. Blake. I'll be performing your cardiac assessment today." Sophie nodded, not trusting her voice. She watched as he washed his hands at the sink, methodical and thorough. When he approached her, she caught the subtle scent of cedar and something clean. Like Rain, Jonathan had reviewed hundreds of patient files in his 12 years of practice. But something about Sophie Martinez's case had caught his attention even before meeting her. Young, no family history of heart disease, symptoms that did not quite fit standard patterns. He had been curious professionally. He had not expected this. She sat on the examination table with a vulnerability that made something tighten in his chest. Her hair fell in soft brown waves past her shoulders, and her eyes were the warm amber of honey held up to sunlight. There was a natural beauty to her, unenhanced and genuine. So different from the women in his social circle with their carefully constructed perfection. "I'm going to listen to your heart first," Jonathan said, pulling his stethoscope from around his neck. "Just breathe normally for me." He placed the stethoscope against her chest, and even through the hospital gown, he could feel the warmth of her skin. Her heart was racing, much faster than it should be for someone at rest. "Are you nervous?" he asked gently, meeting her eyes. Sophie nodded. "I've never been good with medical things. And this city is so big. Everything here is so different from home. Where's home?" Jonathan found himself asking, even though it was not relevant to the examination. "Cannon Beach. It's a small town on the Oregon coast. About everyone knows everyone there." Something in her voice when she spoke of home made Jonathan feel a pang of something he could not quite name. Envy, perhaps. He had grown up in Seattle, in a mansion on Queen Anne Hill, but he had never felt the kind of warmth she conveyed with just those few words. The examination continued. Jonathan was thorough, professional, but he found himself hyper-aware of every point of contact. Every time his fingers brushed against her skin to position the electrodes, he asked questions about her symptoms, her lifestyle, her stress levels, and found himself genuinely interested in her answers beyond their medical relevance. Sophie worked at her mother's bakery, waking before dawn to prepare bread and pastries. She loved the ocean, spent her free time walking the beach or reading in the small apartment she shared with her mother above the bakery. Her life sounded simple, uncomplicated, and utterly foreign to Jonathan's world of hospital politics, society functions, and the constant pressure of the Blake family name. When the tests were complete, Jonathan reviewed the preliminary results while Sophie dressed behind the privacy screen. Her heart rhythm was irregular, but not dangerously so. It could be stress-related, could be a minor conduction issue, could be nothing at all. Standard protocol would be to have his nurse call with results in a week. Schedule a follow-up if necessary. Jonathan did not follow standard protocol. When Sophie emerged, dressed again in her sundress, Jonathan found himself standing rather than sitting behind his desk as he normally would. "Your results will take about a week to process completely," he said. And then he did something he had never done in his entire career. "I'd like you to come back in person to discuss them. There are some nuances that are better explained face to face." Sophie looked surprised. "Is something wrong? Should I be worried?" "No," Jonathan said quickly, and it was true. Her condition was not concerning from a medical standpoint. "I just prefer a more personal approach with my patients, especially when they've traveled so far." Sophie nodded slowly. "Okay, I can come back next week." "Good." Jonathan pulled out his personal card, not the standard practice card with the main office number. He wrote his direct line on the back. "Call this number when you're in town. We'll make sure you're seen right away." As Sophie took the card, their fingers touched briefly, and Jonathan felt that spark again, undeniable and completely inappropriate. After she left, Jonathan sat at his desk for a long time, staring at her file. He had just crossed a line he had never crossed before. He had given a patient his personal number. He had asked her to return for a consultation that was not medically necessary. He should feel guilty. Instead, he just felt alive for the first time in years. Sophie walked out of the Blake Medical Institute in a daze. The afternoon sun was bright, and the city noise seemed louder than before. She looked down at the card in her hand, at the name embossed in elegant letters. Dr. Jonathan Blake. MD Fac. She had felt it too, that connection. That moment when their eyes met and something shifted in the air between them. It was ridiculous. He was a doctor, probably married, definitely out of her league in every possible way. But when she flipped the card over and saw his handwritten number, her heart. Did that irregular flutter that had brought her here in the first place? Sophie found a small cafe and ordered coffee she could barely afford, sitting by the window to watch the city move past. She had booked a cheap hotel room for the night before heading back to Cannon Beach tomorrow. The sensible thing would be to go home, wait for the call about her results, and forget about the doctor with the storm gray eyes. Instead, she found herself pulling out her phone. The number rang 3 times before he answered. "This is Dr. Blake." "Hey." Sophie almost hung up. What was she doing? "Dr. Blake, this is Sophie Martinez. I just left your office." There was a pause, and then his voice changed, became warmer somehow. "Sophie, is everything all right?" "Yes. I just wanted to thank you for being so thorough. And I was wondering if there was anything I should avoid doing while I wait for the results. Any activities that might be risky with my condition?" It was a flimsy excuse, and they both knew it. Jonathan leaned back in his office chair, smile touching his lips for the first time that day. "Your condition isn't serious enough to restrict your activities. You can do everything you normally would." "That's good to know." Another pause, heavy with possibility. "Sophie, are you free for dinner tonight?" The question hung in the air between them. Sophie knew she should say no. This was crossing every boundary that existed between doctor and patient. "Yes," she heard herself say. "I'm free. There's a restaurant called The Walrus and the Carpenter in Ballard. Best seafood in Seattle. Can I pick you up at 7? Sophie gave him the address of her hotel, and after they hung up, she sat staring at her phone in disbelief. She had a date with Dr. Jonathan Blake. She had nothing appropriate to wear, only $20 left in her wallet, and no idea what she was getting herself into. But when 7 o'clock came, and Jonathan arrived at her hotel lobby wearing jeans and a gray sweater that made his eyes even more striking, when he smiled at her like she was the only person in the entire city, Sophie decided that maybe not knowing was okay. Maybe some things were worth the risk. The Walrus and the Carpenter was nothing like Sophie expected. She had imagined white tablecloths and intimidating waiters, but instead found exposed brick walls, an open kitchen, and the comfortable buzz of conversation. Jonathan guided her to a corner table with his hand barely touching the small of her back, a gesture that sent warmth spreading through her entire body. "I hope you like oysters," Jonathan said as they sat down. "This place is famous for them." Sophie had never tried oysters in her life, but she nodded anyway. Jonathan ordered for them both, his enthusiasm infectious as he described different varieties and preparations. When the food arrived, he showed her how to tip the shell back, and laughed gently when she made a face at the texture. "Not a fan?" he asked, his eyes crinkling with amusement. "It's different," Sophie said diplomatically, which made him laugh harder. They moved on to grilled fish and roasted vegetables, and somewhere between the second and third course, the conversation shifted from polite small talk to something deeper. Jonathan told her about growing up as the only son of Richard Blake, founder of the Blake Medical Institute, and how every decision in his life had been mapped out before he could walk. "I wanted to be a marine biologist," he admitted, swirling wine in his glass. "I loved the ocean, spent every summer at our house in the San Juans, studying tide pools. But my father had already decided I would be a doctor, and not just any doctor. The best cardiovascular surgeon in the country." "Are you?" Sophie asked. "The best?" Jonathan shrugged. "I'm very good at what I do, but I'm not a surgeon anymore. I burned out 3 years ago after losing a patient during what should have been a routine procedure. Switched to diagnostics and preventive cardiology. My father still hasn't forgiven me for what he calls wasting my potential." Sophie reached across the table and touched his hand. "You help people. That's not wasted." The simple touch, the uncomplicated acceptance in her voice, made Jonathan's throat tight. He turned his hand over, threading his fingers through hers. "Tell me about the bakery," he said. Sophie's face lit up as she described the early morning rhythm of baking. The satisfaction of pulling perfect loaves from the oven. The regular customers who had become like family. Her mother had started the bakery 20 years ago, after Sophie's father died in a fishing accident, pouring all her grief and love into creating something beautiful. "I know it's not glamorous," Sophie said, a hint of self-consciousness creeping into her voice. "But it's honest work, and it makes people happy. There's something special about providing comfort through food." "It sounds perfect," Jonathan said, and meant it. They stayed at the restaurant until closing, neither wanting the evening to end. Jonathan drove her along the waterfront, showing her the city lights reflected in Elliott Bay, telling her stories about growing up in Seattle's elite circles. He parked at a viewpoint overlooking the sound, and they talked until midnight, until the conversation gave way to a silence that hummed with anticipation. When Jonathan finally kissed her, it was gentle and questioning, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Sophie answered by pulling him closer, and the kiss deepened into something that made them both forget where they were. The next 6 days passed in a blur of stolen moments. Jonathan rearranged his schedule, something he never did, to spend every possible hour with Sophie. He showed her Pike Place Market at dawn, took her to his favorite bookstore in Capitol Hill, brought her to the San Juan Islands. On his sailboat, where they watched Orcas breach in the distance, Sophie found herself falling in a way she had never experienced before. Jonathan was brilliant and kind, driven yet vulnerable. He listened when she spoke, really listened, asking questions about her dreams and opinions as if they mattered as much as anyone else's. He made her feel seen in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. On the 6th night, Jonathan invited her to a charity gala at the Four Seasons. "I know it's not your scene," he said, "but I have to make an appearance. It's for pediatric cardiac research, something I actually care about. Would you come with me?" "I'll make it as painless as possible," Sophie agreed, though anxiety twisted in her stomach. She spent her last bit of money on a simple black dress from a department store. Nothing like the designer gowns she imagined the other women would wear. When Jonathan picked her up, his reaction made her feel beautiful, despite her nervousness. He wore a tuxedo that fit him perfectly, and looked every inch the billionaire heir he was born to be. The ballroom was overwhelming. Crystal chandeliers, live orchestra, hundreds of people in formal wear that probably cost more than Sophie made in a year. Jonathan kept her close, his hand warm and steady on her waist as he introduced her to colleagues and acquaintances. Most people were polite, if distant, but Sophie felt the stares, heard the whispers when they thought she was out of earshot. She saw women looking at Jonathan with open desire. then looking at her with confusion and barely concealed disdain. The worst moment came when Christina Westfield approached them at the bar. Christina was everything Sophie was not. Tall and willowy with platinum blonde hair, swept into an elegant updo. Wearing a silver gown that probably cost more than Sophie's car. She had the kind of beauty that came from good genes and better maintenance. Her skin flawless, her jewelry understated but clearly expensive. "Jonathan," Christina said, her voice smooth as silk, "I didn't expect to see you here. You've been avoiding these events for months, Christina." Jonathan's voice was cool, his posture stiffening. "This is Sophie Martinez." "Sophie, this is Christina Westfield. We used to be engaged." Christina's smile sharpened as she turned her attention to Sophie. "How charming. Where did you two meet?" "She's a patient," Jonathan said, and Sophie felt a little piece of her heart crack at the word. A patient. That's what she was to his world. "I see." Christina's eyes swept over Sophie's dress, her simple shoes lingering on her bare neck with no jewelry. How unconventional. "You always did have an interesting approach to ethics, Jonathan." "Our relationship isn't unethical," Jonathan said firmly. "Sophie's treatment is complete. We're seeing each other as equals." Christina laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Equals? How progressive of you." She leaned closer to Sophie, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "Has he told you about his pattern yet?" Jonathan loves a project. The more inappropriate, the better. It makes him feel alive, rebelling against daddy's expectations. But it never lasts. Eventually reality sets in, and he comes back to the world where he belongs. Sophie felt her face flush hot, then cold. Jonathan's hand tightened on her waist. "That's enough, Christina. I'm just trying to help the poor girl." Christina straightened, her smile saccharine. It's cruel to let her think this could be anything more than a brief distraction. Jonathan moved to respond, but Sophie touched his arm. "It's fine. Excuse me, I need some air." She walked quickly toward the terrace, fighting back tears. The night air was cool against her burning cheeks. She gripped the railing, looking out at the city lights that no longer seemed magical, just cold and distant. Jonathan found her moments later. "Sophie, I'm sorry. Christina is bitter because I ended things 3 years ago when I realized she only wanted to be Mrs. Jonathan Blake, not actually be with me." Nothing she said was true, wasn't it? Sophie turned to face him. "Jonathan, look at me. Really look at where I come from and where you live. I'm a bakery assistant from a town of 3,000 people. You're the heir to a medical empire. This is crazy. The only crazy thing is listening to Christina's poison." Moved closer, taking her hands. "Sophie, this week with you has been the happiest I've been in years. Maybe ever. I don't care about the rest of it, but everyone else does." Sophie's voice broke. "Every person in that room is wondering what you're doing with someone like me. And eventually you're going to wonder too. That will never happen." But even as he said it, Sophie saw other women from the gala watching them through the windows, their expressions ranging from curious to contemptuous. She saw the world Jonathan belonged to, and knew with painful clarity that she would never truly fit into it. Later that night, back at Jonathan's penthouse apartment with its floor-to-ceiling windows and modern furniture that looked like art, Sophie made her decision. While Jonathan slept, exhausted from the emotional turmoil of the evening, she quietly packed her small bag. She left a note on the kitchen counter, simple and honest. "I need to go home. This has been beautiful, but I think we both know it can't last. Thank you for everything. Please don't follow me." Then she called a taxi rode to the bus station and bought a ticket for the first bus to Cannon Beach. As Seattle disappeared behind her in the pre-dawn darkness, Sophie let herself cry for what she was leaving behind. She had found something real with Jonathan. She believed that. But real didn't always mean possible. And she would rather leave now with her heart bruised than stay and watch their connection crumble under the weight of two incompatible worlds. When Jonathan woke and found her gone, he read the note 3 times, his hand shaking. Then he crumpled it, grabbed his keys, and headed for his car. If Sophie thought he would let her go that easily, she didn't know him at all. The drive to Cannon Beach took Jonathan 3.5 hours, pushing his car faster than he should have on the winding coastal highway. He had tried calling Sophie a dozen times, but her phone went straight to voicemail. She had turned it off, shutting him out completely. The anger he felt was not at Sophie, but at himself. He should have protected her better at the gala. Should have seen Christina coming and kept Sophie away from her venom. Should have made it clear that she was not just some temporary rebellion, but something real and essential. Cannon Beach appeared like something from a postcard. A main street lined with shops and cafes, houses tucked into the hillside, and beyond it all, the vast expanse of the Pacific. Haystack Rock rose from the water like a sentinel, and even in his agitated state, Jonathan understood why Sophie loved this place. He found the bakery easily. Martinez Family Bakery, the sign read in cheerful letters, with a painted mural of bread and pastries framing the name. Through the window, he could see Sophie behind the counter. Wearing an apron over jeans and a simple blue shirt, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She was handing a bag to an elderly customer, smiling that warm smile he had fallen in love with. Jonathan sat in his car for a moment, suddenly uncertain. What was he doing here? She had asked him not to follow. Maybe she was right. Maybe this was impossible. Then Sophie laughed at something the customer said, and Jonathan remembered why he had driven 3.5 hours without hesitation. He got out of the car and walked into the bakery. The bell above the door chimed. Sophie looked up, and her face went pale. Jonathan. His name came out as barely a whisper. The elderly customer looked between them with interest. Well, I'll just be going. Thank you for the sourdough, dear. Adar. After she left, silence filled the small bakery. The smell of fresh bread and cinnamon hung in the air. Somewhere in the back, an oven timer beeped. You shouldn't have come, Sophie finally said. You didn't give me a choice. You ran away without even talking to me. I left a note. A note. Jonathan moved closer to the counter. Sophie, you don't end what we have with a note. What do we have, Jonathan? Really? Sophie's eyes filled with tears. A week together? That's not enough to bridge the gap between our lives. And we'll have another week. And another. As many as it takes? Takes for what? For you to realize Christina was right? That I'm just a novelty. Something different from your normal life. Jonathan placed his hands on the counter, leaning forward. Christina was wrong about everything except one thing. You are different from my normal life. Thank God for that. My normal life was empty and meaningless. I went through the motions, did what was expected, felt nothing. Then you walked into my office, and everything changed. Now, Sophie said softly, but what about in 6 months? A year? When you get tired of slumming it with the bakery girl? The words hit Jonathan like a slap. Is that really what you think? That I'm slumming it? I saw how those people looked at me. Like I was a curiosity, something that didn't belong. And they were right, they were wrong. Jonathan came around the counter, ignoring the employee's only sign. Sophie, look at me. She did, and he saw the fear in her eyes, the vulnerability that came from believing she was not enough. I don't want you to change, he said, taking her hands. I don't want you to become one of those women at the gala, polished and perfect and completely empty inside. I want you exactly as you are. I want your kindness and your authenticity and the way you light up when you talk about making bread. I want your small-town values and your simple dreams. I want everything that makes you Sophie. But your world doesn't want that. Your world wants Christina Westfield in a designer gown. My world can adapt, or it can go to hell. Jonathan pulled her closer. Sophie, I'm not asking you to fit into my world. I'm asking if we can build our own world together. Something that works for both of us. How? The question came out broken. How does that even work? I don't know yet, but I'm willing to figure it out if you are. Before Sophie could answer, a woman emerged from the back of the bakery. She was in her 50s, with the same warm amber eyes as Sophie and silver-streaked brown hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore an apron dusted with flour and had that no-nonsense look of someone who had worked hard her entire life. Sophie, the ciabatta needs to come out. She stopped when she saw Jonathan. Oh, you must be the doctor. Mom, Sophie said, her voice strained. This is Jonathan Blake. Jonathan, this is my mother, Rose Martinez. Rose wiped her hands on her apron and studied Jonathan with the kind of thorough assessment only a mother could give. The one who made my daughter cry all the way home on the bus. I didn't mean to, Jonathan said. I'm trying to fix it. Are you? Rose crossed her arms. Because from where I'm standing, you represent everything that could hurt my daughter. Money, status, a different world. I've seen this story before. Rich man falls for poor girl, has his fun, goes back to his real life. Mom, please, Sophie said, embarrassed. But Jonathan met Rose's eyes steadily. Mrs. Martinez, I understand your concern. If I were you, I'd probably throw me out right now. But I need you to know that I love your daughter. I didn't come here because I was bored or looking for something different. I came here because the thought of my life without her in it is unbearable. Rose's expression softened slightly. Love is easy to say. It is, Jonathan agreed. But I'm prepared to prove it. However long that takes. The oven timer beeped again, more insistently. Rose sighed. Sophie, help me with the ciabatta. You, she pointed at Jonathan, sit down and don't touch anything. Jonathan sat at one of the small tables while Sophie and Rose disappeared into the back. He could hear their voices, muffled but animated. The conversation lasted about 10 minutes before they emerged, Rose carrying a tray of golden brown bread that filled the shop with an incredible aroma. You can stay for lunch, Rose announced. Sophie makes a soup on Thursdays. That's worth the drive from Seattle. We'll talk like civilized people. Lunch was served in the small apartment above the bakery. It was cozy and lived in, with mismatched furniture and photographs covering every available surface. The soup was indeed amazing. It's a hearty vegetable stew with chunks of homemade bread for dipping as they ate. Jonathan found himself telling Rose about his life with more honesty than he had shown anyone in years. He talked about the pressure of the Blake name, the expectations that had shaped every decision, the emptiness of his supposed success. Rose listened with the kind of attention that made him understand where Sophie learned to really see people. My husband died when Sophie was 4, Rose said, when Jonathan finished. Fishing accident. One day he was here, the next he was gone. I had a little girl to raise and no idea how to do it alone. But you know what I learned? Love isn't about having everything figured out. It's about showing up every day and doing your best, even when you're scared. She looked at Jonathan with those sharp, knowing eyes. The question isn't whether you love my daughter. I can see that you do. The question is whether you're willing to show up for her every day, even when it's hard. Even when your fancy friends make her feel small. Even when your father disapproves. Even when it would be easier to go back to your old life. I am, Jonathan said without hesitation. I'll show up every day. I'll fight for her, for us, against anyone who tries to come between us. Rose nodded slowly. Then I suppose you'd have some talking to do. Sophie, take him down to the beach. Nothing gets solved in my kitchen. They walked to the beach in silence, following a path that wound through beach grass down to the sand. The afternoon sun was bright, and the ocean stretched endlessly before them. Haystack Rock dominated the view, tide pools visible at its base. Sophie led him to a flat rock where they could sit overlooking the water. For a long time, neither spoke, just listened to the rhythm of the waves. I'm scared, Sophie finally said. I'm scared of losing myself in your world. I'm scared of not being enough. I'm scared of falling completely in love with you and then watching it all fall apart. I'm scared too, Jonathan admitted. I'm scared of messing this up, of disappointing you, of not being able to protect you from the ugliness that comes with my life. But Sophie, I'm more scared of not trying. I'm more scared of losing you by default because we were too afraid to take the risk. Sophie picked up a piece of driftwood, turning it over in her hands. What would it even look like? Us together. I've been thinking about that during the drive. Jonathan shifted to face her. I could cut back my hours at the clinic, come here on weekends. You could come to Seattle sometimes when you want to. We take it slow, figure out what works. Eventually, maybe I could open a practice in Astoria or somewhere closer. Keep my partnership in Seattle, but not live there full time. You would do that? Leave Seattle? Sophie, Seattle is just a place. It's not home. It never has been, not really. But sitting in your mother's kitchen, eating soup and hearing you laugh, that felt like home. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. Your father would disown you. Probably. But I'm 36 years old, and I've spent my entire life trying to earn his approval. I'm tired of it. I want to build a life that makes me happy, not one that meets his expectations. What about the Blake Medical Institute? I have a good partner who can handle more responsibility. And honestly, I've been thinking about what you said about honest work that makes people happy. Maybe I don't need to be at a prestigious institution. Maybe I could do more good running a small practice where I actually know my patients. Sophie set down the driftwood and took Jonathan's hands. This is crazy. Completely insane, he agreed. People will talk. Your friends will think you've lost your mind. They're not really my friends anyway. Your life will be so much smaller, or maybe it will finally be the right size. Jonathan brought her hands to his lips. Sophie, I don't need the penthouse, or the society events, or the validation of people who don't really know me. I need you. I need the way you make me feel real and seen and alive. That's not small. That's everything. Sophie started crying in earnest now, and Jonathan pulled her into his arms. She buried her face in his chest. Years of insecurity and fear, releasing and shaking sobs. He held her, murmuring reassurances until the storm passed. When she pulled back, her eyes were red but clear. Okay, let's try. Let's figure it out together. But Jonathan, you have to promise me something. Anything. Promise me that if you start to regret this, if you start to resent giving up your old life, you'll tell me. Don't let it fester. Don't stay because you feel obligated. I promise. But Sophie, you have to promise me something too. What? Promise me that when people make you feel small, you'll tell me. Don't run away again. Don't make decisions about us without talking to me first. We face things together, Sophie nodded. I promise. They sealed their promises with a kiss, long and deep. With the ocean breeze whipping around them and the sound of seagulls overhead, when they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. So what now? Sophie asked. Now I need to find a hotel for tonight because I am not driving back to Seattle today. Tomorrow I go back and start making arrangements. Give notice on my apartment. Talk to my partner about restructuring my role. Probably have a very unpleasant conversation with my father. Will he really disown you? Jonathan shrugged. Maybe, probably. But I've got money of my own from my medical practice, and honestly, being cut off from the Blake fortune might be the most liberating thing that ever happened to me. You're serious about this? Completely. He stood and pulled her to her feet. Come on, help me find a hotel. And then maybe you can show me around this town of yours. I want to know everything about the place that made you who you are. They spent the evening walking through Cannon Beach, Sophie pointing out landmarks and sharing stories. They had fish and chips at a local restaurant, where everyone knew Sophie by name. She introduced Jonathan simply as my friend from Seattle, which made him irrationally happy. They walked the beach at sunset, climbing on the rocks at low tide, and Jonathan felt a peace settle over him that he had never experienced before. 6 months later, Jonathan stood in the living room of the house he had bought just outside Cannon Beach. It was nothing like his Seattle penthouse. The house was a century-old craftsman that needed work, with creaky floors and outdated plumbing. But it had character and warmth, and a view of the ocean from the bedroom window. He had opened a small practice in Astoria, handling mostly preventive cardiology and consultations. He still kept a partnership stake in the Blake Institute and went to Seattle twice a month for complicated cases. But his life was here now. Here with Sophie, his father had indeed disowned him, at least officially. They had not spoken in 4 months. His mother called secretly once a week, whispering updates and telling him she was proud of him for choosing happiness. Most of his Seattle friends had drifted away. Unable to understand his choices, he did not miss any of it. Sophie was in the kitchen, preparing dinner for their Thursday tradition of having Rose over for a meal. She wore one of his old sweaters over leggings, her hair in a messy bun, flour somehow already on her cheek, even though she had not started baking yet. She had never looked more beautiful. Jonathan walked up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. I have something for you. Sophie turned, eyebrows raised. It's not my birthday. I know. He pulled the small velvet box from his pocket and her eyes went wide. But I've been carrying this around for 2 weeks waiting for the right moment, and I realize there is no perfect moment. Every moment with you is perfect. He opened the box, revealing a simple diamond ring. Elegant, but not ostentatious. Sophie Martinez, will you marry me? Will you build this crazy, imperfect, beautiful life with me? Sophie's hands flew to her mouth, tears already streaming down her face. Yes, yes, absolutely yes. Jonathan slipped the ring on her finger, and they kissed in the middle of the kitchen. The soup boiling over on the stove forgotten. When they pulled apart, both laughing and crying, Sophie held up her hand to admire the ring. Your father is really going to disown you now, she said. Worth it, Jonathan replied. Pulling her close again, they heard Rose's car pull into the driveway, and Sophie quickly wiped her tears. Should we tell her? Absolutely. But maybe after we deal with the soup situation. They turned off the burner just as Rose walked in, took one look at their faces in Sophie's hand, and started crying herself. She pulled them both into a hug, and Jonathan felt the last piece of his old life fall away. This was home. Not a place, but these people. This love. 3 months later, they married on the beach at sunset. With Haystack Rock as their backdrop and a small gathering of people who truly mattered, Rose cried through the entire ceremony. Jonathan's mother attended despite his father's threats, sitting in the front row and weeping with joy as Jonathan and Sophie exchanged vows, promising to show up for each other every day. To face whatever challenges came with love and honesty, he looked into her amber eyes and knew he had made the right choice. Some people would say he had given up everything for love. But Jonathan knew better. He had not given up anything. He had simply chosen the one thing that really mattered. And in Sophie's arms, the ocean breeze carrying their laughter across the sand, he had finally found his way home.